My name's Sean James, and I work in our data center team. My job in the data center team is research and development, finding new technologies and new ways to build a sustainable cloud. A little bit about me. First of all, I'm a musician. I love playing guitar. I've got a really wonderful family. Before joining Microsoft, I was in the Navy in the submarine fleet. And I've spent time at Microsoft doing all aspects of the data center, building the data center, operating the data center, designing data centers, and now research and development. It's a really awesome time to be in data centers, especially at Microsoft, because we are so committed to sustainability and a clean future. When we think of problems like water and climate change, we call these planet-sized problems. These are very ambitious. We started down this path a number of years ago. In 2009, we established our first carbon emission goal. Here in 2021, we're working on commitments such as being completely carbon negative by 2030. That means not only sourcing renewable energy for new data centers we build today, but also figuring out ways that we can capture the carbon that we've emitted since the founding of our company all the way back in 1975. Very, very bold challenge. We think that we'll be able, or our commitment is to actually remove all of the historical carbon emissions by 2050. How are we going to do that? We've got a number of different strategies. First of all, it starts with our supply chain, our carbon emissions, things of that nature. But it also has a lot to do with innovation. And that's where I really get excited. One of the other issues with environmental is all the diesel standby generators that are in our data centers. So every time we build a data center, we connect that data center to the electrical grid. There's always that likelihood that we could lose power from the electrical grid, right? This is why data centers are filled with batteries and standby generators. Now, losing power, getting a blackout from the grid is actually a very rare event. So these diesel generators mostly just sit there. We do have to start them up though, once a month. All data centers are going to, not just Microsoft, we're going to start these diesel generators up at least once a month to make sure that they're in full working condition. So these present an emissions liability that we really think that we can innovate around. There's some other things that we're doing around efficiency, such as cooling servers right directly in liquid and not with air. It's a very efficient way to cool servers and requires much, much less power. So as we're working on our mission to reduce the amount of carbon intensive energy that we're consuming and go completely carbon free, this liquid cooling is going to allow us to make more use of the power that we already have. A little bit about the way this works. So this is an actual photo of a server submerged in this special liquid. It's a liquid called a dielectric liquid. You can see some cases of people experimenting with this for many, many years, especially in the gaming community, right? So gamers are always trying to figure out ways that they can squeak more and more performance out of the chips that they have, their CPUs and their GPUs. And one of the ways you can do that is by overclocking, but that creates a ton of heat. So people in a very, very economical way have been trying to figure out ways that they can cool these chips. Liquid immersion cooling is a very efficient way of doing that. This liquid that we're using in this picture right here is called a two-phase liquid immersion. So what's actually happening is the chips is boiling, the chips are boiling the liquid. And that boiling effect creates a very efficient cooling effect. It's called phase change. So every time you take a liquid to a gas, it requires an enormous amount of energy. And that's where we get that awesome cooling effect. It's very interesting to look at when you walk up to a tank that has these servers into it. So for example, you would walk up to a tank with these servers and you'd see the liquid boiling directly off of the CPU. You can see this picture right here. But then as the server has to do more work and consumes more energy, more and more boiling effect happens as it comes off of the chip. It's very, very interesting. When the gas reaches the top of the tank, there's something at the top that'll recondense that back into a liquid. So it's rejecting the heat out of the tank. And we can do these at much, much higher temperatures. So that's the trick with cooling servers, is trying to figure out ways that you can do it very, very efficiently. So you're using less and less energy to cool those servers. Something else that's very, very important to a data center is energy storage. So I mentioned before, all data centers need to have these batteries in these diesel standby generators, just in case there's any outages from the grid. And this is what the energy storage is for. So for decades, we've sort of been limited to good old-fashioned lead-acid batteries, the type of batteries that you would find in your car. However, recently there's been new advancements with battery technology, especially for electrical vehicles. And these batteries can be used in a data center. And we've actually started transitioning to these newer type batteries. Well, these batteries are much better than the old lead-acid batteries. These new batteries can store more energy, they can last longer, and they can hold a charge much longer as well. So we're actually working on ways that we can replace our diesel standby generators with things like batteries, but also potentially hydrogen. We've been doing a lot of development and experimentation with using clean hydrogen. So if I use hydrogen in a fuel cell, and that's a different type of a generator, but if I use hydrogen, the only thing that comes out of the exhaust pipe is clean water vapor. There's no CO2, there's no black soot, right? There's no fumes that come out of the exhaust pipe. It's 100% clean water vapor. So it's a very, very efficient and clean way to generate energy. Also, hydrogen is a way that you can store renewable energy. So you can see the problem here if you've got a bunch of solar panels and wind turbines, because they might be generating a lot of energy when you don't need it. So you actually have to store that somewhere. Hydrogen could be a very, very efficient and low-cost way to store that energy. And there's a lot of governments and companies working on technology to bring that to market. Lastly, we're figuring out ways that we can use the data center to help the grid. So for many, many decades, the data centers have been more of a liability to the grid, more of a pain, right? Every time we build a new data center, the utility has to accommodate that with new transmission and new substations. We're actually working on ways, and we're starting to deploy this technology in the field right now, where a data center can actually help the grid. So what am I talking about? That issue that I talked about before, where sometimes renewable energy is generating a lot of energy when it's not needed, say like right in the middle of the day, or maybe there's high winds at night, and there just isn't the electrical load to use all of that. Data centers can actually store some of that energy on those batteries. And then the data center can give that energy up when it's needed later. We're calling this grid interactive UPS, and the UPS stands for uninterruptible power supplies. So these are the batteries that we would need to install inside of a data center anyway to keep it backed up. So what we can do is we can actually install a little bit more battery capacity, and we can actually help the grid balance these renewables with the load. We've been testing this for a number of years, and we're actually now deploying it out into the market. And we're very excited for this new way that data centers can actually help balance the grid and actually enable renewable energy on the grid. So we also had a very interesting idea a while back about how can we take and cool servers much more efficiently. And this was the underwater data center that we call Natick. So the idea was, look, if we are going to be having to cool all of these servers, what's one of the most efficient ways of doing that? Well, it's liquid, right? We've already established that with the liquid cooling. Also, where do most people live? If you look around the globe, 80% of the population lives very close to the shore. So we started experimenting with what would it take to put servers actually underwater? And we call this Project Natick. And the project experiment yielded some very interesting results. So number one, inside of this tank that you see here that's covered in barnacles, we didn't use air, we used nitrogen. This would eliminate any risks of condensation getting on the electronics. We also experimented with different temperatures. We also experimented with just how warm would this tank be compared to the rest of the sea. And actually, this tank was only a fraction of a degree warmer than the rest of the water. That's all it really needed to keep the servers cool. We saw an amazing improvement in the failure rate of the servers because we were able to keep it at such a constant temperature. Only about an eighth of the servers inside of this tank failed compared to a regular data center. Now, when we pulled it out of the water after a few years, it was covered in sea life barnacles. But what you're not seeing on this is a lot of rust. That was one of the immediate risks that we heard from our leaders as we talked about this project is, this thing will rust. Actually, there's a lot of ways that you can put these types of data centers, these types of equipment underwater. And one of the ways are using these things right here. These are called zincs. And you just bolt these things on around your vessel. And what will actually happen is the corrosion will start on these before it starts to corrode the rest of the system. And then these can be replaced. So this is also called cathodic protection. Here you can see the end of it cracked open. This is the first thing we did. This is how you get the servers and the equipment inside. Here's a look from the inside as well. So these are all servers right here, and these servers move the nitrogen air out around, and then they get sucked back in along the sides here. Kind of hard to see from this picture, and it circulates that air. So the servers are being cooled with the nitrogen. And then in another part of the vessel, we've got another heat exchanger that then cools the nitrogen and then takes that heat to the outside of the tank. So we're pretty excited about this project. Here's the interesting thing. Even if we never end up building underwater data centers, we've learned so much from this project that can actually help land-based data centers, such as with all of the cooling. Also, how do you maintain servers if you can't get to them? So all of the remote maintenance aspects of it as well. So thanks very much for your time. I enjoyed explaining it. One of our last ambitions is we've done it underwater. Now we're looking towards the space. We recently announced Azure Orbital, where we can actually connect space-based satellites to Azure right directly into our data centers. So very, very ambitious. Working in data centers, it's one of the best jobs at Microsoft, especially working with innovation. Thanks very much for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the event.